I want to address my warm thanks to Stefan Gigacz, a distinguished research worker on Cardijn and the Second Vatican Council, for his invitation and for his initiative, remembering Pierre Haubtmann on the 50th anniversary of his accidental death after 5 years in the office of rector in the Institut Catholique de Paris. I've been, as Stefan said, I've been the rector of Institut Catholique de Paris for 10 years, but previously I had prepared my doctoral thesis on Gaudium et Spes with the great contribution of the personal archives of Pierre Haubtmann. And of course I didn't know that I would be one of his successors afterwards. So my talk will be divided in 3 parts. First of all, what I personally owe to Pierre Haubtmann, and secondly, the topicality of the introduction of Gaudium et Spes that had been supervised by Haubtmann, and finally, last but not least, Pierre Haubtmann, a priest, a pastor. Right, so first part, what I personally owe to Pierre Haubtmann. Of course it is Gaudium et Spes. I'm not the only one to owe Gaudium et Spes to him. We all owe this text to his late involvement in the redaction of the Pastoral Constitution about the Church in today's world. In fact, it was very clear for bishops at the Second Vatican Council that they wanted this text on the relation between the world and the Church, but it happened to be more difficult than what they had expected. And in November 1964, in fact 1 year before the end of the Council, I remind you that there were 4 sessions. They were from October till December each year, starting 1962 and ending 1965. So we are in November 1964, and it happens that there is a crisis, and there is the Father Herring, who was in charge of the redaction and who had done great work already, was dismissed by the authorities of the council. And Haubtmann was chosen because every day he was known to give an overview of what happened during the day. He was in charge of communication at the French Conference of Bishops, so he could understand Latin, and he was a communicator. So he was chosen, and he was at the same time a philosopher, and he had been involved in pastoral matters, so he was chosen. And so he worked enormously for 1 year, and we owe him the final text of Gaudium et Spes because of his vision, because of his courage to overcome adversity and to develop conciliar discussion with modern means. It is a single thing, very concrete, but he rented the first Xerox in a council in history because he wanted that the contribution of everybody could be shared with others within the redaction committee. Secondly, we owe Pierre Haubtmann his archives. He was a historian, so he had prepared archives, but after his accidental death, terrible death at the beginning of a few days before the beginning of the academic year, he fell from a cliff. You know, he had been working the whole summer, and he took short vacation time, but he fell from a cliff in Normandy. And so his successor, who was also an historian, who is Cardinal Poupard, made sure that those archives could be well organized for research workers, and that we owe also to Cardinal Popard, who is still alive, as you know, and who was his immediate successor as rector of the Catholic University of Paris. We owe to Pierre Haubtmann a method in pastoral theology. This is perhaps the most important and not always known by everybody. So for him, I mentioned the fact that he was in charge of communication for the French Bishops' Conference. For him, communication was not a second or a secondary implementation of a theology that would have been done previously and separately. For him, communication belonged to the requirements of faith, so that it obliges, even today, the theological method to change over time. And this he owed himself. We owe things to Pierre Haubtmann, but he was not alone. He was very much influenced by a network, especially of French Jesuits. Henri de Lubac, much well known, Yves de Moncheuil, who was a professor at Institut Catholique de Paris and who was killed by the Germans during the war because he was a resistant with young people. He left Paris and he was involved in the resistance, but he has a major work also, and Henri Bouillard. So he had this network, and he was well aware, like Henri de Lubac was, that the new scholastic method had failed because it was imprisoned in a system that could not reach the people theologians wanted to deal with. And I want to remind you also that he started his first doctoral dissertation was done at the Faculty of Social Sciences at Institut Catholique de Paris. At that time, the faculty was run by the Jesuits. So we owe him a method in pastoral theology also because, and I come back to what I've just said about his first dissertation, doctoral dissertation, the theme of this dissertation was the French socialist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, born 1809 and who died 1865. So this French socialist was active during the expansion of industrial society during the 19th century. And as you know, the relationship between workers and the church were extremely complicated. But from Henri de Lubac, who had written a book on Proudhon in the 1930s, Haubtmann understood that there was much more to discover on Proudhon. And that's why he dedicated his work to Proudhon. And the fact for a theologian to enter profoundly in the thought of a French socialist, philosopher, and also journalist, Proudhon was also a journalist, influenced his way of doing theology. And last thing, we owe Pierre Haubtmann the fact that the question of faith is always at the center when you're a theologian, but also when you're a pastor. You probably know that within the Catholic action in France, there were major conflicts on this very question of the importance of faith. Was it important that Catholic workers referred to faith, or should they only refer to social matters in their involvement in the Catholic action. And the vision of Pierre Haubtmann was that when he was the general chaplain of the workers' Catholic action in France, his vision was that the first reason for the involvement in Catholic action was faith. Faith transferred into action, but faith. So we owe him also the importance of the question of faith, of the disappearance of faith or of its revival in society. And as Haubtmann was previously the head of the general chaplain, it's better to say the head was a lay person, but he was the general chaplain of Catholic action in France for workers. And so he had to be involved when he was working with the Bishops' Conference in the conflicts around the vision of Catholic action. And he always insisted that faith was at the beginning of the action of Christians within Catholic action. So knowing that, he was also prepared to insist on the fact that faith must always be at the center of the theological method. Second part, why is the introduction of Gaudium et Spes, that has been supervised and written by Haubtmann, mainly written by him, why is it so actual? Why is it so topical today? Well, first of all, because Gaudium et Spes in the introduction mentions a radical change in society that is largely due to the action of man, which affects man himself. So Haubtmann was not the only one. He had been working with Belgian theologians such as Charles Müller and Gustav Thiel. I quote number 4 of Gaudium et Spes: "Today, the human race is involved in a new stage in history. Profound and rapid changes are spreading by degrees around the whole world, triggered by the intelligence and creative energies of man. These changes recoil upon him, upon his decisions and desires, both individual and collective, and upon his manner of thinking and acting with respect to things and to people." End of quote. So there was this understanding that human beings were able to change the course of history. Obviously, at that time, people were not so much conscious, and they underestimated the environmental issues, the Anthropocene, we call today. And I want to stress that today Pope Francis insists also that we should not believe that returning to the previous world before the pandemic is feasible, and before the threats on our planet. Look at Laudato Si, Fratelli Tutti, and the book that Pope Francis wrote in conversation with the British journalist Austin Nivereg, The Time for Change. The title is Let Us Dream, The Road to a Better Future.
Sorry, I just have to interrupt. We've got some technical problem in the background here. Unfortunately, our technical system has got some problems there. Greg, are you able to get rid of the background noise there?
Yeah, you first need to give me host privileges, Steph. I can't do that unless...
but unfortunately I cannot. I just ask everybody, could you please look at, we have some technical difficulty here. Could you please turn off your sound? Please
Claudia,
turn off your
Claudia, who has just come in, whose microphone is unmute, is not muted.
Yes.
You can mute once again, everyone, Steph.
Claudia Cocolo.
Yeah.
Just go to participants, mute all, yeah.
No, because I don't have the.
Okay, I've done that, yeah. I've got the host privileges now.
Stefan, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, Greg has muted everybody now,
Yeah.
so we can start again. Sorry for all that.
No, it's better like this. Thank you. So I go back to where I stopped. So Gaudium et Spes was a major text because it let us understand that there are changes in history that are due to the action of man and which have effects on man himself. I was quoting Gaudium et Spes number 4. You can reread that small text. However, I wanted to emphasize the fact that at that time, we were in 1965, there was an obvious underestimation of the environmental issues, of the fact that this action of human beings could threaten the very condition of our planet, of nature, but what I wanted to keep was also the fact that Pope Francis today has the same, Pope Francis is a son of the Second Vatican Council, and especially of this introduction of Gaudium et Spes. He has the courage to tell us that we should not dream that some changes that occurred with pollution, with the threat to nature, or with the pandemics, that they can be forgotten. No, those changes are here. And it is part of the mystery of creation that human beings have the power to change the very condition of our planet. Think of Laudato Si, of Fratelli Tutti. The fact that the poorest people are ignored really changes the condition of a planet with migrations and so on. So Pope Francis explains this in the book that he wrote in conversation with Austin Evergay, Let Us Dream, The Road to Better Future 2020. And another thing that is much, much topical for today, and that you find already in Gaudium et Spes, in the introduction, is that antinomy, tensions, are structural in human beings. And that idea, Haubtmann got it from Proudhon. Proudhon, the French socialist, philosopher and journalist, Proudhon criticized the vision of the philosopher Hegel, who believed that the human spirit can overcome antinomy. For Haubtmann, as for Proudhon, the acceptance of this structural antinomy is a way, is a fact, and for Haubtmann, as a theologian, the acceptance of this structural antinomy is a way for human beings to the question of God. So, in other words, you don't have to get rid of tensions, to get rid of antinomy. It's part of our life. And it's also a way for God to get to us. I quote number 9 of Gaudium et Spes. Since all things are so, all these things are so, the modern world shows itself at once powerful and weak, capable of the noblest deeds or the foulest. Before it lies the path to freedom or to slavery, to progress or retreat, to brotherhood or hatred. Moreover, man is becoming aware that it is his responsibility to guide aright the forces which he has unleashed and which can enslave him or minister to him. That is why he is putting questions to himself. I think this, end of quote, I think this short passage is extremely meaningful for today. Meaningful because we more know that we must do something. That is responsibility. We must do something because we're responsible for the changes in the world. But at the same time, we get to this new path for responsibility because there are inside questions. And after the pandemics, which is still here, during the pandemics, we have experienced together that we put new questions to ourselves. So this way, Haubtmann dealt with the question of tensions, of antinomy, is something that Pope Francis today gets from Romano Guardini, who, like Proudhon, criticized Hegel's project. You find in Evangelii Gaudium, number 221, the fact that Pope Francis says there are constant tensions that are present in every social reality. That is really, Pope Francis, I don't think, is a reader or of Haubtmann or of Proudhon, but Pope Francis started his doctoral dissertation on Romano Guardini. And so Romano Guardini explained that's his major book, Der Gegensatz, translated polarity, a path to a philosophy of living of life, a philosophy of life in the concrete. Pope Francis is much influenced by Guardini, and that's how we can understand his principle that time is greater than space. Pope Francis means, and it's clear in Amoris Laetitia, in 7th chapter, that if, in education, for instance, if you want to eradicate tensions through the use of domination, then you monopolize space. But if you accept tensions, you have to allow time to develop within history. And it is allowing time that you can be really sons of the creation that is not made without tensions, but with tensions that are here till the end of history. Okay, and then from Haubtmann we also get the sense that the plurality of cultures is an opportunity for evangelization, and that's the way I also understand the introduction that Stefan said, and that is usually in Australia, remembering the ancestor peoples who were there in Australia. You cannot evangelize. You cannot spread the gospel without recognizing the importance of culture in the plan of God. You have this in Gaudium et Spes 53, through culture, man renders social life more human. Or in the same passage, according to this sense, we speak of a plurality of cultures. So this sense of the plurality of cultures, Haubtmann got it from the Catholic action worldwide, but also afterwards, I've read some texts he wrote for Catholic universities. He would attend meetings of Catholic universities in different countries, in different continents of the world. And he continued to develop this sense of the importance of the plurality of cultures for theology. So finally and quickly, I want to, I never got to know Pierre Haubtmann. Okay, I was 11 years ago when he died. I know him only from his archives, his texts, his documents, his photographs. But what I keep from him is his attention at the same time to those who do not believe in God and who have grounds for litigating with the church. And this Haubtmann got it, he got it from his experience of Catholic action, from working with lay people involved in different parts of the society, but he also got from reading Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. He wrote, because he had the opportunity to study letters between Karl Marx and Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. And Haubtmann's idea was that, of course, Proudhon was against the church, not because he was not believing in God in a way, but he was against the church when the church was against justice. And so Haubtmann knew very well with Proudhon that there are grounds for litigating with the church. And so I think it's very important today also. There are many, many reasons, and we have to understand what are those good reasons for people to reject the church sometimes. But at the same time, Haubtmann was always attentive to the humble ones in their religious commitment. There is a text when he mentions an old lady who is very faithful to the praying of the rosary. And Haubtmann explains that this kind of prayer of a humble person has the power to transform the world. So he's really a believer, a priest, a pastor, and a Christian. He's also a man who values work. He has done 3 doctoral theses, one in social sciences, the first one on Proudhon, one in history of philosophy, and then one in theology, probably because it was not possible to become the rector at that time of the Catholic University of Paris without being a theologian. So, and he was much dedicated to the church mission. He received several missions. They were not easy for the Conference of Bishops and so on, of bishops in France, but he was always dedicated. And a few weeks before his first appearance on TV for a TV debate in July 1971, I've found 3 boxes of archives, and to prepare a single hour or 2 hours of a debate that was with a major politician who was the Ministry of the Interior. And at that time, the topic of the involvement of the church in politics was very hot. So he was courageous. He was courageous. He was hardworking. He had showed it during the council. I've met some older priests who said that they were at the seminary, the French seminary, when Haubtmann was there. And so he was working all night, and he was sometimes sleeping during the morning prayer, but he was there. And he was a priest who always had who always tried to communicate the warmth of Christianity in a world, he said, that had become colder And that was the vision of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And I know also from all the students, for former students of Institut Catholique, that he was always available to discussion with students in the yard of Institut Catholique de Paris. So he was the rector in 1968, in May 1968. So you can imagine that Paris was a mess at that time, but he was always willing to discuss with students. Okay, that's the way. That's the end of my proposal.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Philippe, for that introduction to the personality of Pierre Haubtmann, not only his philosophical sources and roots, but also many aspects of his thought and work, which actually are very relevant even today. And one of the points that was made to me in preparing for this event was that, in fact, Pierre Haubtmann can be seen as a pioneer of synodality by the way he worked with lay people, consulting them in the course of his work of redaction of Gaudium and Spes. Now I'd like to ask Clara Geoghegan, Executive Secretary of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, to respond. Clara is a historian. She was working also as a church historian at the Catholic Theological College in Melbourne, now Executive Secretary of the Bishops' Conference. Clara, I invite you to share.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Father Bordeyne. In reflecting on this, I guess I had a few notes, but I also took about 4 pages of notes during the talk. It was very, very enlightening. And I guess one phrase that sat with me was, time is greater than space. And here we are, some 70 odd years, almost 70 years on from Gaudium et Spes. And I recall the words of a friend of mine who is a Dominican priest, who said it takes about 200 years to implement a council. So if we take that, we're not yet halfway there. I guess I've always been a fan of Gaudium et Spes because I've always been somebody who saw the importance of being involved in the public square. And I guess, and I know I've had this conversation with Stefan too, when we look around us in Australia, you wonder where the Christians who are active in the public square are. And very often we feel that the church is looking in on itself, that we're more concerned about the mechanics within the institution than how the church can change the structures and shape the cultures so that they are more truly human and more truly reflective of Christ. I guess something that struck me in my early readings of Gaudium et Spes is that the document presumes the involvement of the laity in shaping the church. There is one paragraph there which says that priests are not the experts in everything, but they rely on lay people who are involved in society, in the world out there, to bring that back to the church. And I know John Paul II also in his Christa Fidelis Laity lists 8 ways in which Catholics can shape the society and the culture. And I think in Australia we were particularly privileged in that lay involvement in the church and society was quite prevalent. And I suppose my own background, I was in a parish where my parish priest, when I was quite young, was Father Lombard, who was very much involved in the YCW, and then also Monsignor Kevin Toomey, who was likewise involved. And my mother came to Australia from Italy, where she had had quite some involvement with Catholic action. So this was always a given when we were growing up. The work I have done for many years with the Catherine of Siena Institute, we use stories in that work to convey how to be Catholic in the world. And we use stories from the tradition, which might be the lives of saints, but we also look to ordinary people who walk among us and how they may have brought about the kingdom in their particular way of life. And I guess three that come to mind very much are people like Dorothy Day, with whom most, I presume, are familiar. People someone who for Australians is very well known, and that is Caroline Chisholm, who lived in the middle of the 19th century. And for the Europeans who may or may not be familiar with someone like Giorgio Lapira. Now, Giorgio Lapira, for those who don't know, was actually the mayor of Florence after the Second World War. He was also a Dominican tertiary who took vows of poverty and lived in cell number 6 in St. Mark's. Now, I believe St. Mark's wasn't heated, but he would have had the pleasure of Fra Angelico paintings on the walls. But this is someone, and I think as Father Bordeyne was speaking, the story of Giorgio Lapira came more to the fore because this man worked with De Gasperi in Italy in rewriting the Italian constitution. But as I said earlier, he was also the mayor of Florence. He did a lot of work in rebuilding the city, and he was particularly concerned with the plight of the poor in the city and the workers and the homeless and the unemployed. And interestingly, he travelled to Hanoi and to Moscow to speak with communist leaders about how they were implementing programs. How his evaluation of that I'm not aware of, but he was open to dialogue in progressing his view of justice. And I think it's interesting that all three of these people have had their causes, well, no, two of these people, both Dorothy Day and Giorgio Lapira, have had their causes for canonisation introduced. Caroline Chisholm keeps struggling, gasping for some air. But interestingly, my suspicion is that their causes haven't progressed so far because they were more concerned with being Christians in the world rather than expanding the institution. And now we come to the concept of antinomy or paradox. And interestingly, while they didn't necessarily work for the institution, the paradox is that they challenged the status quo or the understanding of the church as to how to be Christian in the world. So, yeah, I find those very interesting stories. And I think for lay people, and the Gaudium et Spes is very much the document for lay people, although, you know, Lumen Gentium is there too. And Lumen Gentium tells us that the lay people are to make Christ present in those dark areas where the light of Christ may not otherwise shine. And I think that example that we had of those people who were able to move into that area, and also I remember Yves Congar saying that the path for lay people to holiness is not by withdrawing from the world, but rather they achieve their holiness in and through the world. I guess I'm speaking off the top of my head at the moment, but I think also the concepts of, the talk of plurality of cultures and as an opportunity for evangelization. And Father Bordeyne mentioned that, in Australia, we have this paradox here too. And I can't help thinking that just today there has been, we're in the middle of a national summit on violence against women. And the strong Indigenous voice in that was, we can't apply your solutions to our people. We have to address those issues that are faced in Indigenous communities differently. We can't apply our cultural paradigm of white, formerly predominantly Anglo-Saxons, Western Christians, Western Australians. we can't apply that paradox to our those paradigms to our Indigenous communities and expect them to work. So we still have to do a lot of listening to the voices around us in our society. I think the strength, the importance of culture and the challenge of those of us who believe in God in trying to shape that culture so that it is a place where people can flourish is as big a challenge now, I think, as when Gaudium et Spes was written. So I've diverged a little from some pre-prepared notes that I had, but that's my offering.
Thank you very much, Clara, for that sharing. Yes, a lot of points there, which can also be further picked up by other participants. I think we can move to an even more synodal approach for the rest of our session. We have quite a number of participants. One of them in particular, Clara, you mentioned Congar. We have Eric Mahieu, also a friend of Philippe Bordeyne, who is with us. Eric is an expert. He actually edited the Council Journal of Yves Congar. Eric, would you like to add a few comments?
And I see that Albano da Costa really asked for the links between Congar and Gaudium et Spes. So it's really what is needed now.
Excellent.
Yes, Monsignor Philippe, for that wonderful presentation. Also, I was just thinking, because Congar is the first person to write the role of the lay in the church, even prior to Second Vatican Council. He was the first one to write there, and so definitely a lot of influence of Yves Congar. Thank you, but thank you for the beautiful presentation.
Eric, are you there? I cannot see if you're in the audience still. I cannot. I saw he joined before, but now I cannot see if he's still there. Doesn't matter. Who else would like to offer a sharing or a question?
So on Congar, I'm not I'm not a specialist. I would think it's true, Albano. It's true that the theological input of Congar was very important, but Congar was not so much on Gaudium et Spes, I think. I will speak on the control of Eric. Another one was much more important is Chenu, another Dominican. And there was recently a very interesting doctoral thesis by an historian, a young priest in France who is an historian, on Chenu, the relationship between Chenu and the Mission of France, which was a group of priests that were in mission. So, I think, of course, well, those people, those Dominicans, that's my vision. I think that the experience of dealing with lay people, it is really Haubtmann who had it. Chenu and Congar had, Chenu had links with priests who were sent to mission. Okay, that's and Congar had a theology of baptism. That's right, but he so this group, and of course Chenu for Signs of the Times, he explained, because the idea in Gaudium et Spes 4 raised much opposition, and Chenu was the one who to help Haubtmann to give theological arguments in favor of Signs of the Times. But the one who knew that this concept was meaningful to lay people was Haubtmann. As Clara said, okay, he had the contact with ordinary Christians being active, with lay people, being really involved in political, working class fights, so he knew that. Well, that's my my vision.
Thank you. Has anybody else got a question or a comment that they'd like to make at this point? Feel free to enter the debate from wherever you are.
Good morning. Good morning from France.
Sorry, so somebody was trying to say something there?
I think that Eric Maillot tries to speak, but he's very no, we can, Eric, but you have to increase the volume.
Yes, I tried.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, it's better.
Can you hear me? Well, good morning from France. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's a bit soft, but we can hear you.
It's a bit too little. Well, I read the thesis and the work of Philippe Bordeyne, and in it you see on this work of Gaudium et Spes how many actors were implied in this redaction. And so Congar was one of these men, of these people, and he was actually implied quite early, but in the first phase of Gaudium et Spes. And then came the crisis, whom Philippe Bordeyne spoke of this crisis, but at the first time, a Malines document, Malines text, Malines is in Belgium, was redacted by mainly by people from Belgium, also Congar, and people were joined in Belgium, and this text was a bit too doctrinal for the team who took it afterwards in the second session. So the idea in May '63, the idea was to write with Congar a text about Christian anthropology. And for Congar, Christian anthropology is a way to speak to the people, to everybody. So it was a tentative, but it was very difficult because the text was found too conceptual, too doctrinal, in a bad sense. And so Congar was then took in many works, many schemata, we say in Latin, of the council, and was not, of course, always free to work on Gaudium et Spes. And then he met Haubtmann at the council very early, because at the second session, Haubtmann was responsible of the communication, of the information, and he made a few texts to resume in French, to resume the situation of the big problems, the big alternatives about collegiality, religious freedom, and every big issue of the council. It was very clear to read. It was very useful for the journalists, of course, but also for the French-speaking fathers. So he had a gift of clarity, and he was enjoyed with this gift. And also, Yves Congar met Haubtmann very often in the French seminary of Rome, where Haubtmann and the staff, the French staff of the bishops, worked. And Congar lived in this seminary at the third and fourth session. So he met him very often, and they had on the whole the same aim, the same objective in the council. So the church must speak with everybody, a new way of speaking with the world. So on the whole, they would agree. But Congar, as Philippe Bordeyne told, has more doctrinal interest in the text. So we see that, for instance, he will criticize a little some text from Pierre Haubtmann, or from his team, because of some imprecision in concepts. So we see there are many redactors, and everybody has his own interest, his own questions. And of course, Haubtmann became the great redactor and chef d'orchestre of this new team in November '64. And there was a mediation with Congar, because Monsignor Garonne, a French bishop of the doctrinal team, asked to some theologians to prepare some text for Haubtmann. And so Congar wrote a new something about Christian anthropology. So you see, it's always coming back, and with also the patristic new vision of anthropology based on the image of God in man, and with Danielou also around this. So he gave some materials, but on the whole, it's Haubtmann who founded a new text, created a new text, and Congar was pleased with this on the whole, because he told in his diary, he wrote in his diary that this text speaks to the people. The text in Aricia in February '65, the text is speaking to the people. It has the tone, le ton, we say in French, the tone. We could say it has the style, because also Vatican II is a style in a way to meet the people. So he was quite pleased, but he found a bit. He was then a bit outside the team, and he was not associated with the last redaction of the text. And his interests were more, as I say, conceptual. For instance, this idea of Chenu and of him, of the church as a messianic people, and he tried to get it inside the text, but he couldn't. So he was displeased by this little detail, but it's for him very important. But on the whole, I think he was pleased with the final text. After some new difficulties in September '65, when we find Haubtmann and Congar in the same meeting organized by the Bishop Elschinger of Strasbourg, a meeting of conciliar strategy, it is the name, between French and German bishops, to find a kind of conciliation between the vision of German theologians and German bishops about the image of the society and of sin, of the optimistic evaluation of the text, and the French bishops, so, and French and Belgians. So we find in the same meeting, and Haubtmann says in this meeting that he wants to conform to the desires of the conciliar fathers. It is his work to hear every conciliar father and to make the synthesis. So it's interesting to meet the two people, but they were quite different in their background. We don't see any close relation between the two, but on the whole, they were in the same direction.
Thank you very much for that, Eric. I'll just add one more thing, which I actually learned from Eric, or actually from the Journal of Congar, which was edited by Eric, and that is that it was Congar who actually encouraged Cardijn, who became a cardinal for the fourth session of Vatican II. It was Congar who encouraged Cardijn to prepare a series of speeches, including on Gaudium and Spes, and in fact helped him to to write those speeches in Latin. So that's another kind of incident there. I think also it's kind of very interesting, the conflict, let's say, the crisis between what we can call the Sunens redaction, the Malines Brussels Malines 1, and the later redaction. Yeah, I certainly came across that in my research for my speech, which also had a lot to do with a deep conflict of vision between the way Cardinal Sunens saw things from a very doctrinal point of view, and he actually opposed Cardijn, who always had the bottom-up approach, similar to Haubtmann, of starting from the reality. In fact, that's another point of concordance between Haubtmann and Cardijn. Cardijn also was strongly influenced by Proudhon. Those who have a background in the Young Christian Workers will know Cardijn spoke of the three truths, which was actually also based on the antinomy between the truth of faith and the truth of reality, the oppression and conflict in the world. So there's a lot of different interesting points there. I see there's a couple more points in the chat there. Maybe somebody would like to add their own comments. Tony, would you like to say something? I see you've got a few points there. Tony Robertson.
No, just added a few resources there that people might like to follow up. So I hope they're useful for people.
Great,
Stefan,
thanks, Tony.
Stefan, if possible, I'd like to come back to what Clara said, because I want to thank her very much. She's an historian, but she raised very, very present questions, especially that of canonization. And so I'll take your question if I have well understood what you meant, is that you said that probably the fact that Dorothy Day and others and other lay people are not yet canonized or beatified is that they were Christians in the world instead of Christians involved in growing, have the institution grow. Let me say a word on Dorothy Day, because I think she's, I don't know the others so much, but Dorothy Day, what leads to canonization? Maybe, you need a miracle and so on, but there is the relevance for the time, and also the fact that there is some kind of cult, some kind of interest among Christians on the person. And Dorothy Day is really a person who raises much attention in the world. There are congresses, and especially there are young people. In France, you have several circles that keep from Dorothy Day the interest. So you have this in Lyon first, and then in Paris, but they meet with people in London. And first of all, they create new spaces for people to meet from different cultures, the poor with the educated, and they, like Dorothy Day did with Catholic workers, they want to study some topics of the social doctrine, of the social thinking of the church, and very, very present questions. And what I think very interesting in that movement around Dorothy Day is that it's not the problematic of the world against the institution. I think I mentioned what Pope Francis said, the world has been different. What have we have understood with the pandemics and also with the questions of environment, we have understood that questions are global, but that at the same time they cannot be solved without something changing in locally. So what is interesting with Dorothy Day is that under her inspiration, you have networks, new networks that appear, that are local, and that are convinced that the way they deal differently with the poor, with education, with research, are really meaningful for the changing of the world worldwide. And well, you mentioned it, Stefan, you mentioned maybe more Institut Catholique, but I'm now in Rome. I'm very proud that a young colleague, whose name is Vincenzo Rosito, he's a young philosopher and theologian. He was invited to, a few days ago, to give the first conference at the meeting of Italian theologians. And his point for research is really how the church can raise and stimulate the appearance of new ways of relating with one another. And I really think that Dorothy Day is a figure that is important for that. And there is another figure. Yesterday, I'm discovering Rome. Yesterday, I went to the magnificent church of Francesca La Romana near the Forum. Okay, and during the 14th century, she was a lady of rich family in Rome, and she was married. And she was not working for the institution, because at that time, the institution of the church was in poor condition, with a huge crisis, and the accidental schism. And so it was, and there was a disease also, the pest. And so the economic crisis was terrible. Priests were not reliable. And she was living in part of Rome, in Trastevere, and she would give all she could to the poor, and she would tell the priests of her visions. And well, she has become a saint, and there is a major, she's very meaningful today for Christians who think that between the world and the church institution, you need to have new ways of relating to one another. And Francesca La Romana, she founded a congregation with a few ladies in Rome. So I think those figures who are not involved in the big world, but who have been capable through history to have new areas of social relations be born, those people, I hope, will be recognized as saints. And I encourage Christians to discover their witness and to have those saints be part of enterprises of renewal of the social network.
Can I just jump in there? Thank you so much. And look, I quite agree with Dorothy Day. She is still very, very relevant. But the woman that Australia claims, although she was born in England and died in England, was Caroline Chisholm. Now, she came to Australia in the 1840s, when Australia was not long, the colony of New South Wales had until very recently still been a penal colony. So most of the people in the colony were men. And the government was sponsoring systems for bringing women to Australia. But there was no way of introducing these women into the society. And a lot of them ended up being exploited through prostitution and various other things. Some of these women had nowhere to go and were sleeping under rocks. Caroline Chisholm came in and created a system for helping these women find work, but not only for helping these women find work, it then expanded to helping men find work, and then to the migration of poor families from England to Australia where there was work. She had quite revolutionary views on racism. She was quite opposed to the appalling way in which the Chinese were being treated on the goldfields. I've actually written a piece on identifying her as a prophet of Vatican II, because even a lot of what she was doing predated Rerum Novarum. It predated the sort of church's modern social teaching. And, you know, it's just so relevant today. Migration, women, family, employment. So she speaks into all those areas. But as someone in the church hierarchy had said to me, had she founded a religious order, then everyone would have been interested in having her canonized, because she was a mother, a married woman with 9 children, 6 of whom survived into adulthood. And her husband, now this is a good one for the Institute on Marriage and Family, when her husband proposed to her, she told him that she felt called to serve the poor, but she couldn't articulate how to do this. And so she told him to go away and think about the implications of her call on marriage and family. And he came back and he said that he would support her in whatever she was called to do. And in fact, he did, which is phenomenal as a model of marriage, where the husband actually dedicates himself to the vocation of the wife. Quite extraordinary. So anyway, I'll put it out there.
Thanks, Clara, for making known our future Australian saint. I mean, she's already a saint, but we haven't kind of got the stamp of approval yet. So now we have a friend in Rome. Yeah.
And Tony gave us, I wanted to ask for the article, and your article, Clara, thank you very much to Tony for giving us the reference. Yeah, sure. I agree with you, Stefan. Okay, we need also people, you know, to make those points clear. Okay. Cardinal Semeraro, I was with him in the Synod on the Family, on the youth, both. He's the new head for the Congregation of Saints. I'm sure, Clara, he's a theologian, he's a major theologian. I'm sure that he would be open to what you were putting here. Eh? Okay, so if I have an opportunity, I read your article and I will talk with Cardinal Semeraro.
Thank you. I see Albano has a few comments there in the chat. Would you like to speak to those?
No, thanks, Stefan. I just wanted to make that connection between, it's been a wonderful evening, especially how Monsignor, how he connected mission is not just about one way of doing things, but so many other aspects should also come in. And I like that wonderful approach of listening to First Nation people, especially the statement from the heart, you know, and the powerful prophetic statement of John Paul II when he addressed it will not be an Australian church unless we begin to listen to the First Nation people's voices. And so all of this, mission, anthropology, spirituality, all of this comes together in reading the signs of the time on what is our mission in the days to come or post-pandemic. Just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Steve.
And if I may, Albano, you mentioned on the conversation that it relates also to Fratelli Tutti. I agree with you. I think that
exactly. Yeah.
The question, what is very important with Pope Francis is that he's a thinker, really. He's not, he was not a scholar, he was not a university professor, but he's a thinker. He was the head of Collegio Massimo. And he has a thought that is very profound, articulate, and he attacks major conceptual problems And the one that he addresses in Fratelli Tutti is how can we reach universal love? It's a philosophical question. And he explains that you have to start from the nearest, not the nearest that is, a nearest that is alike, a nearest that is full of those tensions that are around us in the local area, but that we sometimes ignore. And he says, and that is true for the family. I've written an article for the next review of Lumen Vitae on the topic. It's in French, but I think it's very meaningful for families, because it means, and Pope Francis addresses the question of nuclear families that are very fond of the local, of solidarity in the local, but only for themselves. What he says are closed families, but there are also open families, which are those small areas where the meaningful experience of the other can be made, so that the path towards universal love is possible. If you don't start with the local, your dream of universal love is a false dream, is a marriage. So, and what he says for universal love is, of course, true also for mission. Okay, if you dream of mission without starting somewhere, and especially where you are, it's false. I was very impressed by what the spiritual fathers did, especially in France. They called foreigners. I had a colleague from Nigeria. He's now Father Bed Ukwij. He's now the first counselor to the provincial, to the general in Rome, here in his congregation, the spiritual fathers. And so he was sent before preparing his doctoral thesis in France, in Paris. He was sent to be a missionary in Brittany, in a part of France. He had to learn French, but not learning French for learning French, only for studies. He started with being a missionary, and the fact that and it's a rule in the congregation. I think it's very important, because it is this recognition of the changing of our world. Because of, see our conference, we are from different continents. It's fantastic. And the people I have in the John Paul II Institute, there are 30 nationalities. But what we can say, well, we have 30 nationalities. It's fantastic. But if we don't create small groups where students and teachers can tackle their own differences, it doesn't work, because there was no start. So that was, Haubtmann was not a university scholar. He was not, a scholar like Congar or Chenu. But I think his inspiration comes from the fact that he started somewhere, wherever he was. He was in living in Meudon, and having a responsibility for a national responsibility in France. But he had a group of young ladies in the Catholic Action. He had this value of the concrete, and I think it's really the inspiration of Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti, an appeal for fraternity, because we will die without fraternity, but an appeal for fraternity that is concrete enough so that it can start from somewhere and not be a marriage.
Yes, the concrete. Was somebody wanted to intervene there? I heard somebody's voice. Otherwise, I'd like to ask Sarah Prenger, who actually may have something to follow on from exactly what you were saying about the concrete and Haubtmann's concern with the concrete. Sarah is the president of the International Young Christian Workers, and those young ladies you mentioned in Catholic Action were from the French Young Christian Workers, the Gigacz. So Sarah, would you like to add a few words on the reality of today, the concrete of today?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan, and thanks everyone really for this really interesting discussion. I learned so much and I've been writing down every single name that has been mentioned in that discussion because really, yeah, it's such a learning experience. And I might also use that occasion to express the thanks of the International Young Christian Workers to the ICA and to all of you for these important discussions you're having, and also this heavy work which you're doing in yeah, really preserving our heritage also. No, and I don't know if I ever told that, Stefan, but when I started in the International Secretariat, you know that we have been doing this heavy work of translating these different quotes of Cardijn, which we were using for our documents. And at some moment, someone said, but you know that this homepage of the ICA, and there you have all these literature of Cardijn already translated. And that was like the huge discovery of your important work. And just to let you know that it's really useful also for the daily work of the young workers today to just have this access to this document. Thanks so much. Yeah, and having said that, really following this webinar is also part of this learning experience. And thanks for providing me about also with this information about Haubtmann. And for me, one aspect is really particularly interesting. Also, every time when we talk about Gaudium at Spes, really this starting point, until which even you also mentioned, all of you know this history about this conversion of the social issue and the ecological issue, which we have in Laudato Si, but we also have it in IYCW today. And one important moment was actually the last International Council in 2016, when really the ecological issue was also mentioned in our International Plan of Action as one issue to start to really analyze it in the same way as workers' issues and workers' rights and the technological development. And this is maybe crucial because, of course, also in our discussions, sometimes we're saying, no, but it's more important to talk about the social issues. And so we really have this discussion also going on that actually the ecological issue is also a social issue. And that actually those who are suffering the most from the exploitation of our earth are the poorest one anyway. And that was a hard issue in our discussions in which we had in Indonesia in our seminar 2 years ago, where we discussed about, yeah, as I said, no precarious work, informal work, the social issues, but also the ecological issues and the technical development, which is going on. And this technical development about, yeah, the internet being in every space of reality, of action, of work, this has been boosted even more because of COVID, as you all know, and I'm pretty sure everyone feels that. And in that sense, all of the discussions that we started in Indonesia, they are going on until today in IYCW. And we have been doing one inquiry about the life realities of the young workers today after the pandemic, which is also published on our homepage. And there, all these issues are also really strong. The impact of digitalization, the social issue, and the big inequality we're facing, but also this ecological issue. And in that sense, I'm taking of this discussion that we are actually really, even without sometimes knowing it, following this, yeah, this heritage, no, of Cardijn and of Haubtmann. And thanks for really providing that link also. And thanks everyone, and have a good day in Europe and a good night in Australia.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, I see Jean-Marie, I think you're sharing your screen. I don't know if you're able to stop the sharing there because we can all see your screen. I don't know how I can turn it off from here. But anyway, thank you very much, Sarah, for bringing us up to date. I'm sure if Gaudium and Spes was being written today, there would be a chapter on ecology. But anyway, it's up to us, I guess, to write that next chapter. Philippe or Clara, would you have any final words that you'd like to say?
Well, maybe on this point raised by Sarah, well, I'm very, very happy to hear what Sarah said, and I want to send you, Sarah, my great encouragements. And it's true that we have to recognize that we get things from the history of the church, but we get a movement. We get a movement. We get a direction. We get a kind of train, and you have to enter the train and to recognize that there are some things missing. And I mentioned it, ecological topics, and 2016, you mentioned that, of course, ecological issues are part of social issues. And certainly, today, I mentioned Vincenzo Rosito, professor at the John Paul II Institute in Rome for Family and Marriage. He stresses the fact that probably in the past, we were driven by political matters, more by political matters. And now we discover that, of course, political debates and matters are important, but if they are disconnected from the construction of the social square, okay, there is the public square, there is a social square as well, and ecological matters are really part of this social square that starts, from nearby, and that has the vocation to grow for the entire planet. So you have the questions of ecology, you have the questions of fraternity, you have the questions of respect of minorities. Okay, you have many questions that are here nearby, and that we are responsible for letting grow. And so all my best wishes for your world responsibility, Sarah. We need you.
Thank you, Philippe. Clara?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to respond, Sarah?
No, just
Clara.
to express my thanks and give the words back, no? Because we need everyone.
Yeah. All right. Clara, did you have any final words that you'd like to say?
I'll just thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Philippe, and everyone else who participated. It was a great exercise. Thank you.
It would be usual practice that we give our speakers a small gift at the end of such a session. Since it's a virtual session, I'm going to give you both a virtual gift. And if you don't mind me doing so, it's going to be a virtual copy of my book on Cardijn's role at Vatican II, which was how I discovered the work of Pierre Haubtmann. So I was going to write it in the chat, but it's disappeared. They're very easy to remember. www.theleaven. Leaven as in the leaven in the bread, theleaven.com.au. And that's the story of Cardijn and what I call the Josist network at Vatican II. And I certainly count Pierre Haubtmann as a Josist YCW chaplain, Catholic Action chaplain, MD Chanu, we mentioned earlier, Congar. So many of those people worked with Cardijn literally from the 1920s. Well, look, I don't know if we've got time, but I see one person's put their hand up for a last question. Who's that? Would you like to say something? The last question? Who's got their hand up there? Charles.
Yeah, my question is, I suppose it's almost a starting question, but the value of organisation for engagement. Vatican II was mentioned, and Louvain College in Rome during Vatican II hosted more than 100 Belgian and Dutch mission bishops from overseas. They educated them in the Cardijn method, and they were a powerful force at Vatican II to push through these ideas. I spent most of my life working in South Korea, and the South Korean church was noted for its organization, whether it was the catechumenate, the RCIA, or whether it was the YCW method in parishes or social action. And through both of these, the church gained great credibility by that engagement. So I suppose my question is really, does anybody want to say something about the organizational engagement theory behind YCW and Cardijn's movement? That was then at Vatican II, but I wonder how it applies today, how relevant it is today for engaging things like environment or whatnot, but organization. That's my question.
Well, I think we could probably have another seminar on that question. Sarah, would you like to say a couple of words on that?
Well, certainly, Charles. Things have changed, okay? And in Gaudium et Spes also you have a huge part on international organizations, political organizations, the United Nations and so on. And there was some kind of optimism at that time. What we discover today, I believe, is that certainly bigger organizations are needed to support smaller networks. But if huge organizations cannot foster the existence of networks of proximity, it doesn't work. You know, on last Friday, I was having dinner at the French embassy before the Holy See with an organization that is very interesting, which is Leaders for Peace. What I find very important is that they start from the ability of gathering people of different origin. There were Muslims, there were Christians, there was a young teacher from Mali who won a prize because he teaches kids in school in Mali to resist violence and to resist the conditions that foster wars. And so I think it's not that larger organizations are no longer meaningful, but it's the way of entering to be part, to participate in those larger organizations has changed. There was probably more confidence given to the big ones. Okay, today, because subjects are more important, you know, so if individual people, if persons cannot experience the value of their own participation to a bigger part, it doesn't work. So it's not the complete failure of big organizations, but the way of organizing with one another has changed. And
yeah, my question was to do with that methodology, the methodology of engagement. In Australia, for example, there are many young people who cannot get employment, and they are not being trained for the future climate change era. And to me, that's a huge social issue and a great need that can, if we engage with that, we've got a common goal, whether we're Muslims or Christians or non-believers. So my question was more about the methodology of engagement.
Yeah.
It's in progress. Yeah, I agree with you. It's in progress.
Yeah.
It's work in progress. It's a challenge. It is one of the biggest challenge to my mind. I agree with you, Charles.
Okay. Well, look, we're already going over time now, and I know we're really raising very interesting questions, which definitely deserve further seminars and discussion. Just on the Vatican II point, I will mention to you, Eric Mahue is with us tonight. I've already asked Eric for next year, perhaps to join us to do a session on Congar's role at Vatican II. So I'll just signal that to you now, and to say that we will be doing more things in this line, because next year is also, well, in fact, you could also say it's already the 60th anniversary of Vatican II, because the preparation was already underway in 1961. But next year will be the 60th anniversary of the opening of Vatican II. So certainly as the Australian Cardinal Institute, we hope to have follow up tonight's session with further similar initiatives, not just on Vatican II, but also on current events. In fact, we do have an interesting speaker coming up, but I won't say who it is at the moment, precisely on the environmental issue. You can subscribe to our newsletter to find out about that fairly soon. But anyway, given that we're going over time, I think we better allow everybody, depending where you are in the world, to get your lunch or your dinner or whatever other engagements that you have. And I would like to thank Philippe and Clara especially, and Sarah for the final words, and Wally for his opening reflection, and to everybody for joining us tonight. And I can assure you, one way or another, we'll be continuing this synodal type of discussion. So thank you very much for being with us tonight on this special day. All right. Well, now we can all talk informally now, because we'll cut out we'll stop the editing of the tape. So if anybody still wants to chat, feel free. I'm happy to stay here for a little while, but do feel free to share your contact details, and on our website, I'll be very welcome to subscribe to our newsletter. And we're especially happy to be in contact with people from other countries, especially the Philippines. And there's many things we can continue to work on, and certainly I think we've learned a lot tonight too. Thank you very much. So I'll allow you all to go. Philippe, I know you must be very busy.
Okay, bye-bye, Stefan. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I have to go.
Yes,
bye-bye.
thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bishop.
Thank you very much for the great session and for your book as well. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, no worries. Thank you.